Welcome to Samvad. And today we are discussing the bone-crushing penalties US is threatening India with and whether Indo-US relations are headed towards choppy waters. And to discuss this, we have with us former Foreign Secretary Sri Kawal Sibal. Welcome to Samvad, sir.
My pleasure.
So last week, US Senator Richard Blumenthal, he was in Rome during the Ukraine Recovery Conference, where he spoke of the Russia sanctions bill, which will impose bone-crushing penalties on China and India for buying Russian oil and fueling war. Now, this provocative statement came during a time when India and US are working on a trade deal and apparently close to an agreement. Now, before moving forward, I would request you to tell us more about the bill and the bone crushing penalties Blumenthal was referring to. And since it is a bipartisan bill with Lindsey Graham also on board, sir, are we to assume that President Trump is also on board?
It's a complicated issue. Thing is that Trump has been pursuing a policy of some opening towards Russia, some resolution of the Ukraine conflict, and it's been blowing hot and cold, which means actually a reversal of Biden's policies. And some progress has been achieved, judging by what President Putin has said that their state departments or the foreign offices are in contact. And what surprised me, he said, was the special forces are in contact with each other also. And as you know, the presidential envoy Witkoff has had several meetings with the Russians. He's also met President Putin. Now, those lobbies in the United States, and they're deeply entrenched, who are extremely anti-Russian and don't want to let Russia off the hook. So they are mobilizing every effort to try and prevent this kind of an opening towards Russia. And Lindsey Graham is an unspeakable fellow. He's a warmonger, a despicable fellow. And I don't want to go into the kind of statements that he's been making on Russia and on Ukraine and this and that. He's been in the forefront, and Blumenthal, who's a Democrat, has been joining him. Now, both obviously have interest in this, whether they are commercial, financial, lobbying, or whatever. There are clearly interests behind this, and they are tapping into a very deep reservoir of anti-Russian feeling in the United States. Now, the thing for Trump is that, as you know, for the time being, he has not announced any tariffs on Russia. He's announced on all kinds of countries, but not on Russia. Well, partly because there's not that much trade, but that doesn't matter. He's not taking into account even the trade balances, even where countries have a positive trade balance where US has a positive trade balance, he has also imposed tariffs on that. So now if you were to impose 500% tariffs on countries that trade in oil with Russia, this means a very big blow to whatever he's trying to do with Russia. It'll mean a complete breakdown of any conversation between Russia and the United States. That's one aspect. The other is that he's been blowing hot and cold on tariffs with China. We have went up to 125%. Now they've come down to a much lower figure. So he's been a bit of a yo-yoing with regard to China. Now, if you were to impose 500% tariffs on China for import of Russian oil, this means that there's a collapse of the kind of trade deals that he's trying to reach with China. Some interim deal has been reached, even that would collapse. So there are very serious repercussions down the line. With regard to India, this entire thing about the trade deal that we are negotiating with them, for the time being, he's withheld announcing any tariffs on India. He's extended the deadline to August 1. So obviously there is some kind of progress on the ground. But worry then to do this or even threaten to do this, it obviously, well, he's not himself threatening for the time being. It'll have a very severe repercussion on our own trade. And this whole business about $500 billion of trade by 2030, that kind of a target
True.
would become totally pointless.
Hmm.
So there are very serious consequences of a step like this. However, uh, Trump initially has been saying that this is too severe and this and that. He has distanced himself from Lindsey Graham.
Hmm.
On the other hand, lately he's also made some very positive noises about how close he is to Lindsey Graham,
Hmm.
how he's always got support from him, and that he's looking into this. Lindsey Graham has said that there will be a clause for waiver in the
Hmm.
bill. So Trump, depending on considerations of foreign policy, can always give a waiver. It'd be like CAATSA if it passes, which means that there'll be a Damocles sword which will be hung on the
True.
heads of India and other countries. And then we'll have to look for waivers. We'll have to demand this waiver. We'll have to mobilize diplomacy to get that. In exchange, if it were to happen, the Americans will then push you on agriculture, on dairy, and everything else. If you want a waiver, then you have to satisfy that kind of transactionalism, which is already there, would
Hmm.
become even worse. So it's a very, very negative move.
Hmm.
And these senators, as I mentioned in one of my tweets, and I have experience of that having worked in the United States. Actually, they think they're the most powerful men in the world.
True.
Uh, they think all of them think that they are presidents of the global community
Hmm.
because there's no check on them. They
Hmm.
can do what they like. There's no repercussion. There's a complete sense of immunity, and they all look for issues on which they can build their reputation domestically and internationally.
Hmm.
There's a sense of power that they have, and this is behind um, the what is happening with regard to this Lindsey Graham and Blumenthal. But 2 points in this regard. The 787 Dreamliner, which is exported to India, is manufactured in uh, in South Carolina, that is Lindsey Graham's state.
Okay.
And Connecticut, from which Blumenthal comes, has a huge number of Indian students.
Hmm.
So I think time has come for I'm sure they're doing it, our mission to activate our Indian community and others and drive home both to Blumenthal and Lindsey Graham that there'll be a price to pay if they continue down this road and start targeting India. I can understand their rancor with China,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
he mentioned India by name.
Yeah, he did that. And uh, so this fellow Lindsey Graham apparently has visions. He was somewhere talking about some visions he has about incidences happening, but that's besides the point. Now, India, we know, sir, we have a huge import of oil, and the impact of oil prices on a developing economy. It's known to everybody. Despite that, India is being specifically being targeted. Now, the Petroleum Minister Hardeep Puri, he said that the American position has always been that you can buy Russian oil, but buy it within a certain cap which they had put to the price. And India has been doing that. So, and Hardeep Puri, he said that India was only helping the global markets by buying discounted oil under a price cap from wherever it could. Now it is also being targeted. We have been listening to a lot of statements about because India is being targeted because of the BRICS association, with additional tariff being threatened for the BRICS association also. So how does this one explain this coerciveness which we are seeing from the United States when both countries are in the midst of serious trade negotiations?
Well, see, this is a reversal of Biden's approach to Indian purchase of Russian oil. If you remember, the former US ambassador said publicly, it's on record, that we had advised India to continue buying Russian oil,
Hmm.
and that would keep the international prices of oil lower. What they have in mind is that if the gas prices in the United States go up,
Hmm.
then there's a big backlash.
Hmm.
Uh, so they wanted to avoid that. Now, if Russia, which contributes about 30% or something like that to the global oil supply,
Hmm.
if this is removed from the markets, then you can see the prices will shoot up like anything. And we'll be huge sufferers because we import 80 some, I don't know, 85, 88% of our energy from abroad. So we are very conscious of the impact of rising oil prices on our economy. That is one aspect. The other is that if we have taken the official position that, look, it's not for the government to direct our oil companies to buy oil from this source or that source. It is entirely left to them, depending on market availability and prices, to obtain oil from whichever source they want. Now, clearly, the oil companies would keep the US sanctions and European sanctions about the price of discounted oil and this and that, the $60 or whatever they had imposed, and would keep within those limits to avoid problems with the US. So we've been buying that. The important thing in this is that there is the imposition of oil sanctions on Russia is totally contrary to international law. It has absolutely no legal basis. It's just power politics. No country is obliged to follow these sanctions. But what really happens is that countries are reluctant to fall foul of the United States because of the financial interests involved and the dollar as the reserve currency and bilateral relations for countries like India with the United States. So we are willing to suffer these indignities and abide by what is something clearly illegal because we think we have wider interests to protect. Therefore, when it came to Iran and they said, stop buying all oil from Iran, we suffered that indignity and we stopped buying oil from Iran because we could do without it, because there are other sources. But with Russia, it's a different kettle of fish altogether. We have a very, very important relationship, strategic and otherwise, with Russia. And we can't seem to be actually doing the American bidding vis-a-vis Russia because that will have very deleterious impact on our vital relationship with this country. Quite apart from the fact that our biggest investment in petrochemical, in hydrocarbons anywhere in the world is in Russia. And we actually want more access to investments in the Russian oil and gas sector because they have huge resources and we can benefit from that. We have signed long-term deals with Russia for LNG also. And I think our investments in the Russian Far East, where in the Arctic area where all this oil and gas is, would eventually be available to us if everything goes well through this Vladivostok, Chennai connectivity route that we have established. So they have thrown a huge rock in the water. It's not even a stone, which, if this happens, which will create very, very strong waves. And then, of course, there is the whole issue of China, which is the biggest importer of Russian oil. They're going to defy that sanction. So I don't know what these American senators and others, what they have in mind. They have no consciousness of their international responsibilities. If you are the biggest power in the world, then you should act in accordance with a sense of responsibility, and not act like a rogue nation, do whatever you want, no matter what the consequences for friends and allies. And the worst is, in a sense, not the worst, but the irony is that when it comes to their own cooperation with Russia, when it comes to buying uranium or titanium or cooperating in the International Space Station, there is still trade between the US and Russia. And Europe is still buying a lot of gas and a lot of oil from Russia. Look at what Hungary says. And Czechoslovakia, what do you want? They tell the European Union, we can't survive without cheap Russian oil. We can't dispense without it. And they're not willing to pay 8, 10 times the price of getting this natural gas or whatever else or oil from the United States. So even in Europe, there are oil and gas connections between Russia and the European Union states, some of them. So will Blumenthal and this Lindsey Graham also impose 500% tariffs on Europe? They won't.
So you wrote about the same thing on X also. I read that when you said that US oil sanctions on Russia, for which being India is being targeted, have no legality on international law, and for critical needs, US still buys Russian products. You spoke of uranium and other minerals, and Europe is buying gas. So you've been watching politics for such a long time, diplomacy and politics. What explains this paradox?
Sorry?
Sir, what explains this paradox of asking India to do one thing and on the other hand doing the complete opposite by themselves and their allies?
First of all, it's Trump in his first term and the second term, who has rocked the relationship with allies in a manner which was not done earlier by other administrations, including the Biden administration. The entire focus was on building strong alliances, strengthening them. In the Western Pacific, for instance, the focus was there. They signed the AUKUS deal with Australia. They defined the partnership with India as the defining partnership of the 21st century. We had this, ICET, the initiative on critical and emerging technologies, which was signed and headed by the national security advisors on both sides. There were some projects for engines for our aircraft and other things. So there was a kind of relationship that was being built up. At the same time, and this is the paradox of dealing with the United States, they were hitting us very hard on democracy issues, on minority issues, on human rights issues. In fact, there still is, somewhat less so, but there still is a huge narrative against India in the American media and American banks and American academic circles during the Biden times. Is somewhat less so because the focus now is on what Trump is doing. So because Trump is destroying, in a sense, in their view, even American democracy. And the manner in which he's dealing with immigration, which means minorities. And then this whole business about Palestine, where you sort of pressure the elite universities of the United States to pressure them economically if their student body and the professors, academic bodies, they support Palestine and stuff like that. So the attention has shifted a little bit. What I want to say is that we've never had a smooth relationship with the United States. Until the nuclear deal, the negatives in the relationship far outweighed any positives. Very few positives. After the nuclear deal, there were many more positives, but there were plenty of negatives too. But the positives outweighed the negatives, frankly. Now with Trump, we really don't know where we stand. His allies don't know, neither do we. Look at the kind of initiatives he's taken. I love America. I love Pakistan. Pakistan's great leadership. He admires them. He invites which is totally unprecedented, totally contrary to protocol, the so-called Field Marshal of Pakistan to a private lunch at the White House. And then he seems to have been moved by the fact that some of his associates signed this digital currency deal with Pakistan and so-called access to their critical raw materials and stuff like that, and wants to mediate between India and Pakistan on Kashmir, an issue that was buried long time ago. At the same time, he said a lot of negative things about a lot of people, but he said a lot of negative things about India on tariffs, but he's not said anything negative about Modi so far, which is interesting. Which is interesting also. And he has withheld sending these letters to various countries, like he sent to Brazil, telling them that we have imposed 50% tariffs on it. The irony is that US has a trade surplus with Brazil, and he's imposed 25% tariffs on Japan, close ally, and the Japanese are totally flustered. So, to answer your question, frankly speaking, it is the erratic behavior, the impulsive behavior, the kind of fixation that Trump has on tariffs, which outweighs any considerations of geopolitics. I mean, unmindful about the impact of this may have on Indian sentiment towards United States. As it is, it was difficult building up trust. Now that trust is fast eroding, especially because of the position he's taken on Pakistan.
So that's a very important point you have raised, sir. The trust issues, because I see a lot of people, the sentiments are turning to be not so warm towards United States of late. People are Indians. I'm talking about Indians. We are seeing, and in a democracy, a leader has to take cognizance of the sentiments of its people. So it's very difficult for India to also build bridges with Trump if this goes on like this.
Well, it is true, but we are playing it cool in the sense that we are continuing the trade negotiations. Though it appears, judging from the statements made by our finance minister and as well as our commerce minister, that on some basic fundamental issues like these GMOs and agriculture and dairy, we're not going to make any concessions of the kind that America wants. Some minor concessions, not on GMOs, but on some agricultural products could be made. So this will be a big sticking point because from the American point of view, this is a very fundamental demand. And Lutnick, as well as their Treasury Secretary, they have all been mentioning this, that India has to open up its agriculture sector. And they are pretty demanding on this. So there's a bit of a block, maybe by August 1, some interim deal may surface. But the pressure will not be let up because we have in mind a kind of a bigger deal by autumn this year when the Quad Summit is supposed to be organized in Delhi and Trump is supposed to come, which will be the time to announce it. But it seems to me, and I think a lot of people share their sentiment, that the decision-making process in the United States is simply not clear anymore. And some people probably may say that there is no clear decision-making process at all, because Trump makes his announcements on Twitter, on the Truth Social, on social media. And that's where he announces his policies, which means that the rest of the government have to wait for what he says on Truth Social to know what the policy is. And then they all join together, like Rubio and others do, to sing praises of Trump's policies and this and that. They have to do it. I mean, a lot of people say that in other countries, ministers flatter the prime minister or whatever else, or the leader in power. But you see that in the United States. They're all sort of saying, that he thinks these things through and this and that. But I don't think they even know what he has in mind until they read his Truth Social and he announces some decision. In other words, normally when you have these very, very important issues, there is a process by which inputs are obtained, and sitting around the table, you take a view, the leader with key people, and then you announce that and through appropriate channels. But looking from the outside, it doesn't seem that there is a process of this kind which is currently operating in the United States.
The scenes from the Oval Office are mostly very bizarre when there are some foreign dignitaries visiting Trump and all the ministers out there, they're standing and praising and fighting. It's something bizarre, never seen before scenes, sort of a thing. But coming to Quad, sir, very important part, Quad, because a number of people say that the United States, the closeness with India started with Quad in the sense that they wanted to weaponize India against China. And since India was reluctant to play that part of being weaponized against US, against China on US's terms, the US started dealing with India on less favorable terms. Now, is this assessment correct, or uh, there are other reasons for this coldness which we are seeing, or the people are simply reading too much into all this?
Let me put it differently. If the whole thrust of US policy towards India was to weaponize India against China, and if that made sense, and if it continues to make sense, then there is no reason why United States under Trump should alienate the way they have alienated Japan, which is now saying that they must uh, carve out some independence away from the United States or South Korea. Both of them refused to attend the NATO summit, which earlier they were attending because they're not happy with the manner in which Trump is dealing with them. With Australia, I read now that there is some rethinking about AUKUS because they're making this AUKUS thing depend on how the clarity they get about what Australia is willing to do with regard to China. So this is a conflicting signal. Now, the point is that you have deeply anti-Chinese people in key positions in government, including the Defense Secretary Peter Hegseth, or for that matter, the Rubio and others. So, and then the Undersecretary of in the Defense Ministry in the Pentagon, what's his name? Anyway, forgetting his name. He is a big China hawk and very pro-India. I've been meeting him in the Raisina dialogue once and twice, very favorably inclined towards India, but because of the China factor. At the same time, Trump, because he's supposed to be a peacemonger, he doesn't want to start new wars. So it's not very clear what he wants to do with China. He blows in hot and cold with China. I mean, he says bizarre things. The other day, remember, he said that I spoke to Xi Jinping and I said, and I told him that if you attack Taiwan, I'll bomb China, I'll bomb Beijing. I told, and he says, I told Putin that if he goes and whatever he does in Ukraine steps up, his thing, I'll bomb Moscow. Well, I think 10% they believe me, he said. I mean, and a sane man talking like this.
True.
But what I mean is that he wants to engage China. He wants to have a deal with China. He wants to have a transactional relationship with China, which means that he's going to overlook so many other issues, especially geopolitical, if the trade business can be settled well. At the same time, there are very powerful forces in the United States which see China as a challenge, and they see the growth of Chinese power, and they know that this is going to affect the overall supremacy of the United States. So they want to keep China down. They are denying technologies to China, and they're feeling that even with the kind of tariffs they've imposed on China, 50% or whatever it is, whatever the figure, that is going to hurt China very deeply, given that Chinese economy is already in trouble. And with these kind of tariffs, Chinese exporters really don't know where to export, who to export to. Apparently, so they say the ports are getting jammed up with cargo which is not being lifted. Whatever the thing. So it's very difficult to figure out what Trump has in mind, and that brings me to more precisely to the question you asked about weaponizing India against China. Now, if their policy towards China itself is not clear, then all the more reason for India to be careful in overstretching ourselves in an anti-Chinese direction at the behest of the United States, and be left out in the cold when the United States and China strike some kind of a deal. Therefore, quite apart from other factors that we are contiguous to China, they're sitting on top of us, our forces are facing each other. We have a worrisome two-front situation. Our Deputy Chief of Army Staff has said publicly that during this recent conflict, the Chinese are providing real-time intelligence information to the Pakistanis, etc., etc. So uh, we have we therefore have to deal with China in a very, very cautious way. It's a very, very difficult situation for us in the sense that uh, if our relationship with the United States deteriorates visibly, the Chinese will get more encouraged that India is in a weaker position, so they can put more pressure on India.
Mm.
If we become too close to the United States and do what the United States wants, then we'll make our diplomacy towards China subject to American policy,
Mm.
which is ridiculous. Which is ridiculous. We don't want our policy to become a prisoner of China, of U.S. paranoia towards China. So we have to both resist and engage China, which we are doing. Now our foreign minister is there in the SCO meeting. These are signals to the United States also.
Mm.
My mind, the right signals that don't believe that we have no options. We are not going to play. If you're going to play the kind of games you are playing with us, then we will also not play games, but we'll be careful that you have also sent a signal that we are not bereft of choices, either vis-a-vis Russia or vis-a-vis China.
Sir, even AUKUS is in trouble because the Australian Prime Minister is apparently visiting China for trade deals and trade negotiations. He's in China right now, or he's about to go to China. So AUKUS is also not that functional right now. So, but one my final questions are very brief answer I would like, sir. What was the true intent of Quad? Because I could never make out what exactly was it meant to do.
No, but Quad was actually meant as Abe of Japan, who was the
Hmm.
originator of the idea that United States may not be an Asian country,
Hmm.
but it is very much geopolitically an Asian country because of the stakes they have in Western Pacific, the bases and the forces they have. They're present there. They're militarily far more present than any other country in that part of the world.
Hmm.
Uh, so that the United States, Japan, which is threatened by China, because remember, Abe said that they want to convert the South China Sea into a Beijing Lake.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Hmm.
Australia came under a lot of pressure from China and India. In any case, you know what our problems are with China. So if these four countries get together and especially focus on maritime cooperation, then it is a deterrent to China.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
China lanes of communication, maritime lanes are very, very vulnerable. And then we'll be doing exercises in Malabar, where progressively we brought in Japan, Australia, and Japan. It's a clear signal that Malabar is the military arm of Quad, although we don't say so.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you have a Quad as a kind of a combination of significant powers, major powers in Asia, which evaluate the Chinese threat and want to deter it and curb its maritime expansionism and ambitions. This is the purpose. And they
Hmm.
try to bring in Indonesia, which is very vital because it straddles all the vital straits through which the Chinese submarines pass.
Hmm.
Indonesia is showing some signs of, openness towards the Quad, and they also have now ASEAN developed their own Indo-Pacific policies and this and that. Europe, as you know, has now an Indo-Pacific policy. They've declared one, and countries like France are active. Even even the French are active. The British are active to a limited way.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
this is the purpose of Quad and associated support that the concept of Quad is getting without being members of Quad from other countries which are cognizant of the rising China challenge.
Good, sir. Thank you, sir. Would like to conclude on that part, sir, and
Thank
and
you.
see where this goes, where this bone crushing penalties go, and I'll come back to you when these penalties come into place or don't come into place. I'll keep coming back to you. Thank you
All
so
right,
much, sir.
my pleasure. Bye
Thank
bye.
you, sir.